Good morning. It's Super Bowl Sunday. 49ers are going to the Super Bowl. Come on, you Niner fans, stand to your feet. Come on, Niner fans, stand to your feet. Come on, Niner fans, stand. Okay, now stay standing, Niner fans. See how you're all standing and all happy right now? I want you to do this repeatedly this morning while I'm teaching the Bible. Like just whenever it feels right, get up and let it rip, baby. So, you Niner fans, I love you. Look at Stuart. Stu, I'm watching you, baby. Look at him. He got a Steve Young throwback jersey on. Okay, what are we doing here? We're doing the Bible. So, listen, you do not need to amp me up anymore. Checking my watch all night long, it's 2 minutes after midnight. I slept a long time, looked again, it's 9 minutes after midnight. It's going to be a long night. People have asked me a lot about this Super Bowl game today. John, are you praying against Mahomes? No, I'm a Christian man. I don't do that. So I just want to clarify that out there. Don't put that on social media. However, if Patrick, when he's scrambling in the pocket, trips a lot, I'm cool with that. Or like if he gets muscle cramps in his legs and can't move and he's paralyzed, that would be cool. I want him to, however, to have a lot of pass completions, but only to guys with the letters SF on their helmets. So those are my main thoughts. But I'm a Christian man, so of course I wouldn't pray against him. Anyhow, just wanted to get that out there. In all the fun that we're having here, I do need to just have a moment of life reflection. I think we need to be real about this world in which we live. And when I walked out here last week at exactly this time, somebody grabbed me and said, John, Kobe's dead. And I just remembered, and here's a picture. You guys see this all over the internet. That's Kobe and his 13-year-old daughter, Gianna. And but by the way, they're only 2 of 9. There's many other families deeply grieving. But I look at this, and as we talked about true God last weekend and idols this week, Kobe for many is an idol and an icon and a legend. And when you think about, just look at this picture, when you think about it, here's a man that's 41, healthy, a legend, phenomenally successful, probably got $500 million in the bank, beautiful wife, 4 beautiful daughters. How does life get any better? And then boom, a foggy day, and he and 9 others. And I watched this, and the only thing that kept going through my mind is, I can't accept this, I'm grieved. And I remembered what the Bible teaches about the uncertainty of the length of our lives, that our lives are only a vapor, only a mist. Only a vapor, only a mist, just poof, gone. You say, John, that terrifies me. Then you have another task to do in your life, actually an important one that you can begin today, because I don't believe you're ready to live until you're ready to die. But once you're ready to die, meaning you've made peace with God through Jesus Christ, then you can really begin to live, because you're not living in the place of fear, the place of terror over your demise one day, right? Again, we're not ready to live till we're ready to die. Okay, let's dive into our Bible study for this weekend. Have I mentioned to you, beautiful people, that I love my wife, Carrie, very much? I don't know if I've mentioned that to you, so I'm mentioning it now. I am as delighted with her today. By the way, we're in our 38th year of marriage, as I was when we were college students about 117 years ago. And I say that so I can put this sort of circumstantial possibility in front of you, and it's this. Imagine if this woman that I love as my wife, tomorrow morning when we get up, she walks by the dresser and she sees my device, my iPhone, on our dresser, and there is her picture on my iPhone, and right next to it is the picture of another gorgeous woman. So she's looking at this going, what is this? So let me tell you what she's almost certainly not thinking when she sees her and the other woman on my iPhone screen. She's probably not thinking, well, this is interesting, but it's a free country. And after all, John has his right to privacy, so that's cool. It's not a problem. That's not going to happen. What she's going to do is pick up my iPhone and walk into the bathroom where I'm innocently shaving and put this in front of me and saying, "Who is this?" And by the way, she'd have a right to do that. And here's why. I promised myself to her only. And she promised herself to me only. And so there's that sense of exclusive devotion or loyalty to one another that we made a sacred promise to one another, right? Now, you say, John, why are you telling us this? Because what I've just described to you, I think, is the essence, the jugular, the heartbeat, the pulse of our Bible study today as we arrive at the second contentment. It's exactly what is in the heart of the Father, because what I think God is saying to us through today's Bible study is something like this. My child, I am your God. I'm your Redeemer, and I've saved you and bought you for myself at a terrible price. Please don't ever put anything in the place that belongs to me alone in your heart or in your mind. My child, because I love you with all of my heart, and I've always wanted to care for you, protect you, provide for you, and bless you, my child, I ask you one thing. I'm asking that you have no other gods in your life, that you worship me personally and directly, that I would be your one and only always. Please don't put any other pictures on your phone that rival your loyalty to me. Don't carry any other false images in your heart. Don't turn to any false god, idol, or image for comfort or satisfaction, because I'm actually all that you need. See, that's the essence, that's the spirit. And so we arrive, if last week we entitled the first contentment, True God, this weekend we're titling number 2, Contentment, Empty Images. You say, John, why empty images? Because in balance, relative to the magnificence, the beauty, the wonder, the holiness, the goodness of who God is, any image, any idol is incredibly empty and hollow and a fraud and deeply unsatisfying. Now, I want us to look at the passage here. So take your Bibles, please, or your devices. By the way, you can get 100 different translations, English translations of the Bible on your device. And I want you to take your notes as well. We have hard copy option, or you can go to YouVersion online, and the Bay Church notes for each weekend will pop right up there for you for your convenience. I want us to look at our scripture today, and it's Exodus 20, verses 4, 5, and 6. Now, I'm going to warn you, there's going to be 2 or 3 things that's going to cause you to raise your eyebrow and say, what could that possibly mean? That's weird. That's strange. I didn't expect that. I wonder why that's in the Bible. We're going to talk about all this stuff real quick, okay? But let's begin by reading it. It's kind of long, so let me read it to you, okay? We'll read together in a moment on something else. So Exodus 20, verses 4, 5, and 6, the second commandment. You shall not make for yourself an idol in the form of anything in heaven above, earth beneath, waters below. You shall not bow down to them, or you shall not worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. What does that mean? That's one of the curiosities I'll explain. Punishing the children for the sin of the fathers to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate me. What does that mean? We'll also talk about that. But showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. Okay. Now, we look at this passage of Scripture, and it is these 3 verses that we're going to focus on. But I want to do what we've been doing each weekend of our 10 Contentment series. I want us to take a moment as community, and let's read all the 10 commandments through right now, but I want you to really focus on number 2. We're going to read them all through, but really zone in on the second. Let's read all of them. Please begin. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. Honor your father and your mother. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. You shall not covet. As I was reading these earlier this morning, I thought, what a wonderful world it would be if human beings just instinctively, all 8 billion of us on the planet, lived by a life code or an ethical parameters like the life-giving principles we just read. First of all, there'd be no more attorneys because none would be needed. And by the way, I affirm attorneys and lawyers. But I'm simply saying, how much of human behavior is us trying to erect fences and barriers and justification to protect ourselves from other human beings and to protect them from us, and we're squabbling over mean little advantage, and we're not telling the truth, and we're always usually thinking about us ultimately at the end of the day, not them, and we're going to do whatever is necessary to have our way, get our way, pad our nests, line our future world, and go happily ever after. What a wonderful world it would be. But there's this little 3-letter principle that changes everything, and it's called S-I-N, sin. And now, Jesus totally verified and reinforced that the 10 Commandments are valid for all time and eternity when in Matthew 22, do you see it there in your notes on the back panel? They asked him, Master, what's the most important commandment? And he said, well, there's not just one. There's one with 2 parts. And here's the answer. Most important, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second one's like it. Love each other. Love your neighbor as yourself. And you are now in a community sitting, sharing right now in this moment with a community that deeply believes that God has called us to be about the task of loving God and loving people. Loving God and loving people. We did that yesterday in preparation for the Super Bowl, by the way, under the leadership of Vontre Mason and Norma Gaitan and team. We ran 2 football camps down in Bay Point for children that needed a loving presence in their life, and it was incredibly awesome. And now today, we're turning where you're sitting into Super Bowl Central. In the courtyards, it's going to be food, burgers. We're going to have Garoppolo burgers and Kittle hot dogs and Nick Bosa Cokes and all that kind of stuff. And for the children and their families, don't have parents, foster parents, just everybody that doesn't have a place to belong, that's what we're going to do all afternoon long here at this church. Now, let me give you a working definition of an idol. Do you see it there? An idol or an image, and by the way, those are interchangeable and synonymous, idols, images, is anything that is a substitute. Circle the word substitute for the true God. And so here is our overarching principle that I want you to get today. And if you get this, you've gotten everything. Worship the true God directly in, fill it in, personal relationship. Not at a distance with artificial man-made religious props. In other words, what we are learning in these first 2 commandments is we're learning the primacy of worshiping the true God in a personal relationship, because that's what will invite into our life a permanent contentment. Now, do you know how many people we have in our church that have some version of a spiritual history, personal spiritual history or background, but it's not the healthiest spiritual history? Notice what we've said here. God is inviting us to come to him personally in personal relationship. You don't need idols and images. Come directly to me, the Lord is saying, because we human beings have created something called religion. Listen, God did not make religion. Mankind made religion. So we've created artificial, man-made religious props and systems, and sometimes they're corrupt systems. And there are literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that call the Bay Church home that have said to us as pastors and shepherds, they've said, you know what? I didn't know God could be this close, this real, this like normal, because God to me has always been at a distance. It's been through this distorted religious system. I've been actually terrified of him, or thought that he was so unconcerned or disconnected from me because he's running the rest of the universe. What time could he possibly have for me? And they said, it's just like I've had a spiritual homecoming. And so maybe that's your story too. Now, I want you to look at the chart that I've included in your notes. Thank you very much. I want you to look at the charts that I've included in your notes. By the way, my granddaughter Eleanor is moving to the Bay in 5 months now. I just had to get that out there. So she may be helping me teach on weekends. She's a piece of work. Commandment 1 and Commandment 2 are not like this. they're like this. They feed off each other. They're in essence the same command. So in commandment 1, do you see it there? We're learning the correct object of our worship. Commandment 2, the correct method of worship. In commandment 1, we're learning who to worship. In commandment 2, how to worship. Who are we worshiping? The true God. How are we worshiping? In personal relationship, right? Commandment 1 prohibits false gods. Commandment 2 prohibits false worship. Now, did you notice in verse 4, God said, you don't need any substitutes. Come straight to me in personal relationship. But notice in verse 4 where he listed these substitutes. He said, from the sky, from the earth, and from the water. In other words, God doesn't want us to make images or idols from created things. We are to worship our Creator, not His creation. Because when we sort of sell out and worship man-made created things from the natural universe, 3 things happen. First of all, it limits who the true God really is in our lives. Secondly, it will always represent a false image of the true God. And thirdly, we become like that which we worship. We'll talk about that more in just a moment. So here's the bottom line. You might want to highlight it, circle it, underline it, just make it shout. And it's this: any image is a false image. Any idol is a false idol. And so that's why we talk about empty images. Now, there's a legendary writer about the faith by the name of A.W. Tozer. And he says this, quote, he goes, it's of immense importance that our idea of God correspond as nearly as possible to the true being of God, because idolatry is libel on his character. Substitute not the true God for one made after our own likeness or shaped to our own personal agenda. I promise you that if you have intentionally or very possibly unintentionally permitted images and idols in your world, usually they look a lot like us and a lot like our agenda. We don't mean that to happen, but that's the net outcome. So you say, John, what are the biggest idols that we should be aware of these days that would rise up to challenge our relationship with the Lord, rival our love for God? What other pictures might be on our devices that would seduce us away from our first love? Well, there are many, many, many. The Bible talks about things like power and pleasure and fame and status and money and many others. And when we give our lives the essential purpose of chasing down these things, we've slipped into idolatry. In other words, we're surrounded by more idols in the 21st century than mankind's ever been in history. At the touch of a finger, we can be anywhere on the planet. One of my favorite things is Google Earth. Let's go to Beijing. Let's go to the Amazon River Basin. Let's go to Hard Rock Stadium in Miami. Okay, boom, you're there. We have a marketing obsessive, selling obsessive, advertising network excessive culture, and we are selling images and idols all the times through billboards and digital culture and magazines and internet and social media and 1,000 other venues. Do you know what the bottom line of all that marketing is? Think about it now. It's to absolutely capture as many people as possible. Our passion, our time, and our money. You say, John, I don't really believe that. Okay, then let's do a test, you and me. I challenge you. When you're watching the Super Bowl today, watch the commercials and write down when that commercial's over. By the way, the going rate today is $10 million for 60 seconds. Watch that commercial. Do you know what we could do with $10 million as a local church? Somebody write those marketers and say, you know, there's a church here in the Bay where the 49ers are from. Would you give us 60 seconds of your profit margin? And we were going to do some amazing things for real people. Anyhow, watch the commercials today. Have a sheet of paper, however it is you take notes, and write down what each commercial's trying to sell you. You will find they are trying to sell sex, money, power, satisfaction, pleasure, security, safety. All these things are what they're trying to sell. Now listen, guys, you may be hearing me for the first time thinking, man, is John just kind of like a negative downer? Not at all. I'm an optimist big time, but I'm also a realist. And I'm an optimist because I am a realist, and it helps me look through life at a lens which frames things through an accurate biblical worldview rather than the changing values and fads and viral stuff in an ever-changing culture. Now, when we talk about this empty images, there's two things I want to say to you today, and we'll wrap. Fill in this first big principle. We become like that which we worship. Did you know that? Only got two real applications, and this is number one. We become like that which we worship. Now, I've included for your convenience two of the very best biblical passages that support what's going on in the second commandment, and they're Romans 1 and Psalm 135. They're a bit lengthy, so I want to read them to you now. You just sit back, get comfortable, and listen hard to the essence of what the Father's saying through these two verses, okay? Let me start with Romans 1. What may be known about God is plain to people because God has made it plain to people. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools. Now notice the trade that happens. They traded, or they exchanged, the glory of the immortal God for images. Do you see it right there? They exchanged the immortal God for images. The real for a substitute. And what is that substitute? Images made to look like mortal human beings, birds, animals, reptiles. By the way, as you look at all the religions of antiquity, you will see the art of those religions of antiquity are art of the natural world. And by the way, there's real beauty in the natural world, and we deeply appreciate it, even celebrate it, but we don't worship it. We worship the Creator, not the creation. But look at the last sentence. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie, and they worshiped and served created things rather than the Creator who is forever praised. Amen. Is that not potent? Let's check out the next one in Psalms. Let me read this one to you. This is Psalm 135. So the idols of the nation, notice the word again, idols, images. The idols of the nation are silver, gold, made by the hands of men. They have mouths, can't speak, eyes can't see, ears can't hear, no breath in their mouths. Those who make them, here's the punchline, those who make them will be like them, and so will all who trust in them. Remember when I said a moment ago that our idols at the end of the day, we usually design in our own likeness according to our own personal agenda. Tim Keller is, well, Tim's a man of God, and he's right in the heart of the Big Apple in New York City. And he was wrestling with the implications of idols in his own life, and somebody said to him, Tim, how do you identify idols in our lives? And his answer was, well, for example, look at your daydreams. When you don't have to think about something, like when you're waiting for the bus or whatever, where does your mind always reflexively love to rest? Or look at where you spend your money most effortlessly. Or if you take your most uncontrolled emotions or the guilt that you can't get rid of, in all these things you'll find your idols at the bottom. If you look at your greatest nightmare, if something were to happen that would make you feel you no longer had any reason to live, that's very probably a God in your life. He answers one more question. Well, how do we get rid of idols? He said it all begins with analyzing and recognizing an idol in your life, because that's the first step away from the power of that idol or that image over you. And that's really what we're doing today. We're being courageous enough and honest enough and humble enough to identify what other things we've not identified before may have a seductive control on our spirit and soul. In other words, we become what we behold. We live in a selfie culture, and we're all erecting sad little sandcastles. And what the Father is saying to us this weekend, everybody, he is saying, no, my child. And he reaches down gently and pulls our little fat hands off our little sandcastles. And he says, my child, let me lift you up out of the muck and the mire and give you a fresh new vision of me and of my purpose for your life. That's what the Father's saying to us today in this second contentment. I love what Carolyn Arends has written. She actually writes this article about addiction. It's profound. Listen hard to her words. She goes, I've never met a potato chip I didn't like. Actually, I've never met a potato chip that didn't call my name from behind the pantry door until I was forced to consume it, and every one of its salty companions. So when I hear the phrase carbohydrate addiction, I knew nutritionists were onto something, because it turns out in my research that there are actually foods that can actually increase your hunger when you consume them, creating an escalating, recurring need for the very substances that intensified the problem in the first place. Is anybody on Super Bowl Sunday out there with the pastor? I read that and I said, oh, Nick Bosa got me. Okay. It seems, she continues, that this phenomenon symbolizes much of what plagues the human condition. We buy objects that require us to buy more objects. Like, I'm a horrible builder of things. Like, you have to assemble that any sixth grader could assemble. I got no clue how to do that. And you open it up, start reading it through, and said, now assemble all the items you'll need. And by the way, make sure before you leave the store today, you've bought these 7 other items so you can assemble the thing that you bought in the box. So back to Home Depot I go, or back to Target, or whatever. We buy objects that require us to buy more objects. We make some money, but then we ratchet up our lifestyle in response to that new income, and we find we now need much more income to sustain our new income. The harder we work, the more work there is to do. The harder we play, the more elusive the fun. Yesterday's thrill is only today's old news, because we always need more. She continues, one of the hallmarks of addiction is tolerance. The experience of requiring an ever-increasing amount of a particular substance or behavior in order for it to satiate us. What gave us that arousal, that release, that satisfaction a year ago, we now need more of that same thing, whatever it is, to achieve the same outcome from a year ago. And it escalates, 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 escalates. It's harder to spot for those of us who are compulsive about work, food, approval, ministry, possessions, intimacy, social media, security, or any number of more culturally acceptable addictions. She then cites a renowned psychiatrist, Dr. Gerald May, and he writes, addiction is 2 things. First of all, at root, addiction is a spiritual issue. Secondly, every human is addicted to some variety of substances, behaviors, and thought patterns. See, we usually only use addiction in reference to substances. We can be very addicted to behaviors and thought patterns. And by the way, we need to start at our thought patterns, because as a person thinks within themselves, so they are, and our behaviors flow out of our thought patterns. So we have to begin at the root, or the source. But then she references Dr. May's classic book, Addiction and Grace. And he argues, now watch this everybody, that each of us has a profound desire for God as human beings. And when that desire is inevitably frustrated or misdirected in a fallen world, we then experience pain. Everybody knows about that. We then deal with the pain in one of 2 ways. We repress the longing, or we attach it to something else. Now watch this. We are obsessed then by unworthy masters who can never truly satisfy. Tragically, our attachment to anything other than God, even to things that are not in and of themselves bad, uses up all of our desire for God, and we become, in a very real sense, truly wasted. And Dr. May calls this addiction the spiritual disease of our era. concluding with these comments. Satisfaction can only come when we spend intentional time with God. It comes when that original longing for God, a desire that's been mutated into 1,000 splintering directions, gets redirected back to Him. She wraps up. All substitutes, even salty, crunchy, delicious ones, only intensify our hunger. That's powerful stuff. Dear ones, think deeply and carefully and honestly about these things. Okay, let's move to closure. Second big principle so we can wrap. The Lord is a jealous God. The fill-in is the idea of jealous, and that might be a curiosity. It might wrinkle your brow. I want to explain to you what it means here in context. Here's the foundational assumption about God and us, okay? So if you're writing, if you're taking notes, finish your sentence, your words, stop and look up at me. Here's the essential reason why He's a jealous God. Because the Father passionately loves us. And because His love for us, it's not a casual love affair. It's not an on and off again divine romance. He passionately, unconditionally loves us forever. It's the agape love of God, which is the most supreme kind of love, an unconditional commitment to an imperfect person, just like you and me. But we are made in His image, and we are fearfully and wonderfully made, and He passionately loves us. So this is how I want you to understand God's jealousy for each one of us. It's His attribute that says, I want from you, my beloved child, exclusive devotion. I want your exclusive loyalty. Remember I referenced by saying, how's my wife going to feel if I've got her and my girlfriend on the screensaver for my iPhone? That ain't going to be cool. You know, I'll be preaching next weekend, but I ain't going to be looking like this, I'll tell you. Right? And that's essentially what God is saying, because true love only functions best in exclusive loyalty or exclusive devotion. Now, you might have been freaked out by what happened in verse 5 and what happened in verse 6. Because in verse 5, you saw the idea that kids get judged for their parents' sin, and the next 3 and 4 generations, you're like totally in San Quentin, man. Okay? And we could think that's not what's happening there. So, in verse 5, there is a penalty, but this is what's happening. Write the word next to it, descriptive. Verse 5 is a descriptive statement about what usually happens in human families and in human legacies. In verse 6, where it says a blessing, this is prescriptive. And prescriptive is what God wills and what should be. God does not want us to live in the place of penalty. He wants us to live in the place of blessing. But the penalty is descriptive of what's happening way too much in this broken earth, in the broken hearts of God's broken kids. When what He wants is the prescriptive blessing of what could be and should be in Him, not just for 3 or 4 generations, for 1,000 generations. In other words, how you and I are living today, the decisions we're making, behaviors we choose, will echo in eternity. Long after we have died and left the planet, and our bodies have become worm food, and our spirit and soul have gone home to be with God, our great grandchildren will be living out some version of the legacy that we left behind. I've only mentioned 8 or 10 or 12 greats. This is 1,000 generations. Now, look at it a little deeper. Notice the penalty. The sinful inclinations and habits of the parents visit upon the 3rd and 4th generation of those who reject the Lord. In other words, God does not judge children for the sinful choices of their parents. And by the way, do you remember how we define sin? When God says don't sin, what He is saying, my child, because I love you, don't hurt yourself. Don't sin means don't hurt yourself. Why do you keep doing this? You're killing yourself, my child. And I would stop you. I have the power to do that, but I choose not to because I've made you a free moral agent with the power to choose. But you're killing yourself. You're choosing stuff that is self-impaling and self-destroying. what we communicate from generation to generation on the penalty, the descriptive side of the ledger, is inclinations and tendencies. Example, how do you think little kids are when one of the parents comes home again in a raging alcoholic rage, and lamps are thrown and every curse word is screamed at the top of lungs, doors are slammed, and two little kids are in their bunk beds wetting themselves again with terror and fear. They're literally emotionally traumatized. It is literally PTSD. So now these little kids are teenagers. Now they're young adults. And they find themselves at 27 doing things they never thought they'd do, didn't even plan, don't even know why they're doing it, but they're now trying to resolve marriage confrontation with their spouse 15 years later, and they're throwing lamps and dropping F-bombs and raging and slamming doors at 2 in the morning, and their kids are wetting themselves in their bunk beds. That's what the Bible's talking about. You say, well, John, how can this really sort of destructive legacy be broken? Here's the answer. The shed blood of Jesus Christ our Lord. It is what Christ has done for us. Christ, who is the image of the invisible God, God in the flesh, dying for our sin, can absolutely, boom, break that legacy and its stronghold on us, our children, our children's children, and to 1,000 generations. Thank God for grace. Now, go to the blessing side of the ledger in verse 6. Check it out. The love and blessing of God rests upon 1,000 generations of those who love him and keep his commandments. Now look at me. Are these people that are only loving God perfectly, flawlessly, and keeping his commandments perfectly and flawlessly? No, there are no perfect people. What God does when God evaluates our life, he's not evaluating the day where we had a bad hair day, month, or even a bad hair year where we demonstrated very naughty, bad behavior. He looks at the whole of our lives, not the poor decision or behavior of a moment, the whole of our lives. It's talking about people whose intent of their heart and the general set of their life is about loving God and obeying the Lord. That's the people that his blessing, his favor will rest on for 1,000 generations. Okay? Now, what I haven't told you earlier is that God also, there's a part of him that's for images. Because what we've been talking about is don't have lame substitutes for the living, true God. But God's also into images. Let me give you an example. God created us in Genesis 1 in his image. That's why we're so dissatisfied with any lame substitute image. Furthermore, it's his purpose that we be conformed to the image of Jesus Christ, the book of Romans. Furthermore, fill this last one in. What is the eternal, holy, powerful, all-wise, good, loving, true God really like? The answer, of course, Jesus Christ, who is the image of the invisible God, according to Colossians chapter 1. See, the decisions we're making in these first two commandments about who we worship and how we worship will echo in eternity. God is saying, my child, don't settle or be seduced by a lame, pathetic substitute. Come to the real. Come to the true. Come to me, says God, in personal relationship, and you will know immense contentment. I wrap with an I said, God said. Imagine that the human race is having a conversation with God and God's responding. I said, God, if you love me, you'd give me the things I want and you would let me have my way. I raised 4 kids. They said that stuff all the time. You say I'm created in your image. If this is true, I shouldn't have to labor and sweat like a dumb animal. If you love me, you'd give me more of what I deserve instead of less of what I want. You'd give me a life of peace and joy instead of misery and strife. You're not expecting to live in this world by your rules, which keep me from being free. You'd give me a choice. After all, it's my life if you love me. By the way, it did occur to your pastor. What an awkward day to preach on idols and images when I am dressed like this. You know what I'm saying? I'm walking out the door, my wife's looking at me going, really? So I wore a sport coat. Let me tell you what God said. God said, because I love you, I let you have your way and you lost everything that you ever really wanted. Because I created you in my image and you distorted it by living like the animals over which I gave you dominion. Because I love you, I would not leave you to an eternity of what you deserve. I sent my only Son to satisfy your deepest needs. And me alone will be your peace, your joy, your contentment in the midst of a broken earth. I gave you clear guidance to freedom from the world's obsessions which enslave. I gave you life gift wrapped in the risk of choice because I love you. Would you stand to your feet with me, dear friends?